Hello and welcome to Modern Thatch Living. Today, instead of doing DIY, I'm going to show you how I make scones. This episode is as a thank you for the many subscribers that I have who I suspect are largely my daughter's friends. Anyway, let's get on with making some scones then. So now I'm going to weigh out a couple of ounces of butter. There we go. It's a funny thing that I learned to cook in pounds and ounces, and even though at work, being a scientist, I use grams and milligrams all the time. When it comes to cooking, I find it's much easier to still use pounds and ounces. It's just how I learned how to cook, and somehow those units still make sense when it comes to making things in the kitchen. So what we've got here is 8 ounces self-raising flour, 2 ounces of slightly salted butter, 2 ounces of glace cherries. I'm soaking them in water at the minute to remove some of the sugar, 2 ounces of apricots and 1 ounce of almonds, and we've got about 1 ounce of sugar. Now this is always difficult because when you put glace cherries in, they have a lot of sugar in them. And even when you soak them, they still make the scones very sweet. So it's a little bit difficult to judge exactly how much sugar to put into this. I quite often cut it down to below 1 ounce. But I think for this recipe today, it will probably be okay at 1 ounce. They might be a little bit sweet. So the first thing I always do is to add the butter and the sugar together. And then I mix the sugar into the butter, basically melting the butter with my hands and getting the sugar thoroughly mixed in. The reason I do this is because I always feel that it's easier to get a uniform mix of the sugar in the butter and then get the sugar butter mix evenly distributed through the scones afterwards. I sort of feel like if you add the sugar in after you've mixed the flour with the butter, there's a good chance that you'll get some areas where there's more sugar and others where there's less in your final mix. It's also doing it this way round, the sugar and butter tastes really nice. So it gives you the opportunity to have a taste of what you're making early on, particularly if you've got a sweet tooth. Right, so that's thoroughly mixed in now. So the next step is to add the flour. And now we need to mix the flour with the butter and get it thoroughly distributed. The best thing is just to rub the flour and butter between your fingers and hands and just keep going until the mixture is uniform. So it should look something like that when you're finished. And now making sure that the cherries are thoroughly washed. So remove all the sugar, or as much as you can. Obviously there's sugar that's soaked into the cherries, and there's not a lot you can do about that. So, next step, put the almonds in. And we need to cut the fruit up before adding it. And now we need to mix the fruit in. So now is a key step, which is adding enough milk to get the consistency right. Now you don't want to add too much, it needs to be quite dry at the end. If you're using fresh fruit, then you have to be even more careful because there's quite a lot of water that comes out of the fruit itself. So now just mixing it in until I get the right consistency. It's still quite crumbly at the minute, so I'm going to add just a touch more and keep going until I've got just the right mix. We're trying to get it so it just binds together. It's starting to come together now. Let's see. Now it is sticking together quite nicely. That's the sort of consistency that I'm aiming for with these. Right, so there we go. And now we need to get a baking tray ready that we can roll out the scones. Right, so you need to make balls that are about that sort of size. Probably get 6 to 8 out of this mix. So now what we need to do is go around and just try and push the bits of fruit in underneath the surface. There'll be a tendency for them to burn if you don't do this. And I've put quite a lot of fruit, a huge amount of fruit in these actually, and so it's actually going to be quite difficult. to completely bury the fruit. I like to make the surface a bit rough, a bit spiky. Find it browns quite nicely when you do that, and you get some quite tasty bits. Well, more tasty than the rest of it anyway. And there we are, all ready for the oven. So I've allowed the oven to warm up before putting the scones in. The temperature of the oven is about 220 degrees. There we go. And it should take about 10 to 12 minutes. So I'm going to check after 10 minutes what they look like. Right, they look done now nicely. So they've had about 14 minutes, 14 or 15 minutes. So there we go. So, turn the oven off. Now put them on a rack to cool down. Here we are. The scones all complete now. I'm finished, cooled down. And just see, they've quite a good consistency here. It's still quite soft because it's still warm, but it's not too wet, which is the main thing. And it tastes absolutely lovely. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Modern Thatch Living, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Goodbye.